We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey.
So today's episode is going to be really cool.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be really cool.
I think it's something that we have been talking about for a few weeks now.
Right.
Just waiting until recording.
And we have a really good title, which is How Our Stories Shape Our Reality.
Yep.
Yeah. How our stories shape our reality. And so a lot of it, we're going to be talking about our perspective and why we see things the way we see them. Because it's that, for me, that was certainly a big healing step for me, is once I got that, and it was really liberating. So I'm excited.
Yeah. So maybe we can start with even like describing that concept of stories. Like, what do we mean by stories?
I can give a good example.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let's start with an example. So there was a particular couple that I knew, and at the time I went to church with them, and we were friends. And so I don't know how long this episode happened to when they actually spoke about it with me, but
Okay.
it felt like it was a long time. And so one day the topic came up, and the wife said to me, well, my husband is really upset with you because you glared at him in church. And I said, I glared at him in church. And the first thought in my mind is, I haven't glared at anybody in church that I can think of. Like, that didn't even cross my mind. And why I certainly couldn't understand why I would glare at him. I had no problem with him whatsoever. So I was really taken aback by that. And I said, what are you talking about? And so she said, well, there was one time in church on Saturday night, and you looked over at us and you were glaring at him. And I said, I can promise you I never did that. I said, maybe I was looking past him and squinting my eyes to see something, but I said, I can tell you, I didn't glare at him. Like that episode didn't happen in my head at all. And, just really made me understand that's a perspective. And from that perspective, from that look, that one look that I gave, an entire inaccurate story was created.
Yeah.
And that story, so I know it was for months. I don't know how many months, because I kind of felt the tension between her husband. I couldn't figure out what was going on. And it was that. And so they carried that for months. And I didn't even know how to approach it because I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know it was me. I thought, well, maybe he's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
It didn't cross my mind that it was me, honestly, for the first time. Usually I'm used to in the past that everything's my fault, right? But it was really interesting to see their perspective and how wrong it was. And then the story that they created from that and what that story did to their reality. So that's a good one, huh?
That's a good one. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about how there's like two kind of stories that we create in interaction with both ourselves and the world. So stories about the world outside of us. So it's like other people or something outside of us, but then also stories about ourselves.
Yeah, there is that.
So there's like two kinds of stories. So like one example with stories about ourselves is that it's, I don't know, like good example is when we're young, something happens and we create story about it. And then we create this like belief of I am like this because of this. And we just keep attaching to that. And I think what happens is that we get attached to that story so much that we have like this filter that we look for proof that whatever that story is true.
There's evidence. And I can tell a really good story for that one about myself. And it's a podcast that we've already done. And that's the one where I was told that nobody likes me. Right. And I 100% believed it at that moment. So that became my reality. And the story that came from that for years was that I walked around with the belief system that nobody liked me. And guess what? There was evidence all over, because that is what I was looking for. I had that filter or those glasses on. We've talked about that before, of, having the perspective of nobody likes me. So that I went into every relationship or every interaction with a person already having that belief. And I even had evidence that that wasn't true, but the belief was so deep that it took me a long time to overcome that belief, but that became my reality and my story.
And once it's your reality, you don't even see it as a story anymore. It's literally
No.
your reality. It's the
Yeah.
fact. It's true.
It becomes in the subconscious at that point. And
nobody
so
likes
if you're
me.
not,
It's a fact.
yeah, yeah. And that's, and that's, and of course that's what I saw. When I think back now on, with a much healthier view, I can see where, no, I was actually liked. I really was. I just wasn't seeing it at the time. I was looking for the other evidence. And I, of course, found it. You're always going to find it because it's what you're looking for.
I think I had something similar with I have to figure it out by myself. I can't ask for, one was that I can't ask for help, but I also had belief, I don't know where exactly it's coming from, that I don't deserve help or support. I have to kind of figure it out by myself. And then when I started relatively recently, like last 1 or 2 years, I started to challenge that a bit and kind of open my eyes to possibility that maybe that's not true, which in itself, not an easy thing to do. I started to see how much support actually is there available. I would just not even not see it, but literally dismiss it. That
Ooh.
I was so blind to it that
Were
even
you
if it
expecting
was
a
there,
different, were you in those situations expecting a different support? And so you were expecting this support, but you actually got this support?
no, I think what I would perceive anybody offering help, it would be like they're pointing out that I'm not able to do it myself, or I'm not, you know what I mean? I would make it mean,
It's a
again,
trigger.
that's a story. I would make it, if they offer me any help, when they generally just wanted to help me, whether it's like business or anything really, I would see it as them pointing out that I don't have it figured out, or
Yep.
you
Yeah.
know,
You need
anything like that.
they have to help you in order to get this done because you're not capable of doing it yourself. How
Exactly.
interesting.
And
And
then
really
I
they
would have
were,
to, by denying, I'm proving that I got it, even though I didn't.
oh, how interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
could see that. I could totally see that.
Yeah, and it's really really interesting because now that I'm more open to that, I see how much help is out there where people just want to help. They're pretty much like me with others. I just want to help them, sometimes because I can. As simple as, or I see potential in them, or like any reason. But it's not to point out how bad they are at what they're doing. It's just because I can help and I want them to succeed. And now I'm starting to see that how others, when they're helping me or offering help, that's what's there. It's not them
Right.
being like, oh, you're actually not that good at what you're doing, so let me jump in and help you fix
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, I can understand that one. I can actually relate to that one because it's so funny. Once you said it, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see parts of my life where I still do that, but I'm aware of it, so then I
Yeah.
can turn it off. I mean, that's one of the things, we've talked about so often is self-awareness. And that's one of the benefits of self-awareness is we can catch this stuff. We can be aware of it and then we can manage it much better, which is, come out with a different resolution than what we think is there.
Yeah, and one thing that I would invite listeners to do is think about what are the stories that you have. And you can think about whether stories about other people, whether stories about certain situations or even life areas, just write down stories and then you will see, and then you can test or just like fact check them.
Yeah,
Is
be
this
curious.
actually true, or is this the story that I have created? Because there's so many stories that and And I feel that once we start to get more in that level of awareness, we start to see all those stories to an extent where it might be like overwhelming, especially if we don't really know how to change them. So you know what's a story, and you know that, oh, okay, I created this story because of this, but you still keep living that story. You know, you still keep living in that reality, even though you know why you are in that reality. And then it's about finding ways how you can maybe change that story. Or one thing that can help is, well, one is to give yourself enough proof not to believe that, where it's kind of, okay, this is one story.
Look for the opposite.
Exactly. There's enough facts to prove that it's actually not true. Like in my case, when I would have that belief that anybody who helps me, they want to point out how like bad I am at what I'm doing. Nobody has said that. Like I haven't really
They've actually said the opposite.
Yeah, they're like, they want to help me because they might see that I'm stuck in somewhere that it's kind of pointless to be stuck in.
Right.
Or they just see my blind spots that I don't see. But if they didn't offer me help, maybe that's when they'll kind of not care even, you know. But they're offering help, so they actually want to help and give that support. So, but the story that I would have is just, you know, but now I'm just receiving it and kind of still learning to be okay with it, you know, because I'm so used to being like, no, I'm good.
Yeah, and it's a reaction, right? It's a reaction,
Yeah,
and then
because the
you
ego
can
makes
catch
it mean
yourself.
something.
Yeah,
you know,
and
like
then you can stop.
Yeah, and because for me, I'll just start thinking that, oh, I'm not like self-sufficient to be able to handle this myself. But the more I think and the more I even observe things around me, I see how like nothing really is made in isolation. Like, especially if you want to go far. Nobody, well, we all hear about somebody who made it by themselves, but even athletes that are super successful, they have teams. And people who are really successful business people, they have teams. They didn't go there by themselves. And a lot of times they have their spouses or their friends and their really close group who are supporting them at their like down moments. So that's something where even me thinking that I have to do it all by myself, it's kind of like, if you look at reality, that's not really how you truly succeed. It's just that story that, oh, I have to do everything by myself. And you just put that pressure on yourself that you have to do that. Which again, it just comes most likely from one incident sometime in the past that's right now irrelevant. But we create this story and we just create our reality around that story that a lot of times, depending on the story, but a lot of times with some negative stories, we literally end up putting ourselves in a place where we start to suffer. We start to make it really hard for us just because we want to be so attached to this story because we see it as true.
It can become like your identity at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
And you know, and what comes to me that is something that I deal with in a lot of people who are healing from abuse and trauma is in the triggers. Because in the triggers, there's big stories. There's a big, inaccurate, false story in a trigger. Because, you know, and I talk about the one trigger that I got a few months ago where I was able to take it very slowly from the beginning all the way through to the end. And I, you know, I called it, you know, and I could see in that spot between when I was triggered and when I reacted, the story that went in there. And it was so interesting because it all came to me at once and I could see exactly where the root of that was. And it was absolutely incidents that happened in my childhood.
Yeah.
And so there's this whole, and I identified the story immediately. And I also identified, oh, that's from way back then. That's not true today. And I could process it and come out with a different story and conclusion. So that story is now done and gone, you know, and there's a new story that's filling that space. And so the triggers, though, those are what can really trip us up.
Yeah, and they're really strong as well. So every
Yeah.
time
And
we
when you
trigger
don't
that,
have, the self-awareness, it's just it's autopilot. And I'll tell you, it's frightening, because before I had the self-awareness to realize that I was being triggered, when I think back on it, it's really frightening, because you go from calm to chaos in an instant. And that story comes forward and it makes you feel like crap. And it's just this vicious thing. And then you're reacting because you're in that old story, and you react from that old story. And then you turn around after everything's calmed down, you feel horrible because of the carnage that you created from being triggered and not having that awareness to identify the story and the reality of it and change it.
so if somebody is in this vicious cycle, what could help to deal maybe with that guilt or shame that happens after you come out of it and now you see
Mm-hmm.
all the damage that you have done? Like, what would be some of the things that you would advise to help to deal with that? Because now, like, the damage is done, you're now at the end of it and you're seeing all the damage that you did, and I think that's where you
Yeah.
can start to feel even worse about yourself.
Yeah.
Like, what are some things that they can do?
Oh yeah, you could spend days or weeks beating yourself up over that. There's even times where I would think back on years ago and beat myself up. And the thing is, recognizing and acknowledging that you were triggered, that you're in a place of healing, that yeah, you messed up. You definitely messed up, and forgive yourself, because you're in a place of, usually that is a place of, you're at the beginning of your healing, or you're in your healing and you're becoming aware of this stuff. And I have gone back and I have absolutely cleaned up my mess. I have gone back to people that I have hurt in those moments and absolutely apologized to them. So that's that's a tough one, but it goes real far on the cleanup. It shortens your cleanup for sure, is going back and apologizing. And then once you're in that place where you're starting to see this, it's empowering, because now you're going, oh, okay, now I got you, triggers. I got you. And it's empowering, and you can get to that place of recognizing when you're being triggered, taking a pause, taking space, processing, because all in that processing is recognizing the story and the crap that's in there.
Yeah.
And then you have the space to create a new outcome from that trigger.
New story.
And it's gonna, you know what, you're gonna mess up. You know what, you're gonna end up triggering anyway. I mean, I still do. Not hardly ever, but I recognize it immediately. And sometimes I'll just say, you guys, I'm being triggered. I'm being triggered right now, you know? But it is empowering, and it's, it's a process, and it absolutely can be done. And it is the way to manage some of your stories, and certainly your triggers.
And I think it's even like speaking on triggers, that's one of the things that I was thinking about last few days, how, like exposure therapy that is helping you to deal with whatever is the trigger by actually facing it. And I think that's where a lot of times we can practice dealing with those triggers by intentionally putting ourselves in, as long as they're not like maybe toxic,
It's a safe situation.
Yeah,
because there
exactly.
are those.
So putting in situations that you might feel that trigger, but it's still safe situation. It's not like hostile or anything like that.
Right. You can safely manage it.
Exactly. And that's when you can practice that self-awareness. How do I feel? What do I want to do while I'm feeling this? And even thinking about what's my usual response. And you might even observe in the first time, what's your usual response? Then you enter again. Even before you enter, you say like, okay, maybe I will try different response, not maybe fully different, but maybe a bit different. And then as you do that, you start to get more maybe familiar with that situation until it's not maybe fully comfortable, but it's not as triggering. Like for me, big thing was like just networking, talking to people. I was convinced I'm boring. That is my story.
Oh my gosh. Everybody, she's not boring. She's one of the most interesting people in my life. So
exactly. But if you would tell me that, I would be like, yeah, right. Yeah, like I wouldn't even believe it. I was convinced I'm boring. I'm not interesting. People don't like talking to me. That was what I was convinced like about. And I remember there was one time when And there was also coming a lot of like insecurities and like body shame on top
Sure.
of it. So that's when I would be like in interaction with people. Literally, like when I was a kid, I wasn't able to look person in the eye, even if it was like a family member.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to do that. That's how afraid I was. So now, like many years later, I was like, okay, I'm gonna start networking with one goal, to get comfortable talking to strangers. That was the goal. And then when I started to talk to people, a lot of people would message me literally like weeks or months later, being like, "Oh, I was thinking about you," and I'm like, "Why?" You know. But the more I had those conversations, the more I started to see how there's actually a lot that I can add, and a lot of interesting conversations that I can have with people, where it's not just interesting on my end, but it's also interesting for them. And that's one of the things where that kind of exposure started to help me
Evidence.
to, exactly, I started to collect evidence.
Mm-hmm.
But if I didn't have that, if I didn't face those like fears or maybe some insecurities, I wouldn't even give myself an opportunity to see that there is something potentially different, or there's something in my story that might not be true. But it is really interesting how we come up with those stories and we stick with them so long. Even like there was one like small period when I started to, every day I would journal on my communication or like interactions with people. So like I would go to cafe, and one day I was like, I would just order whatever, and I was like, I'm not looking the person in the eye. I'm afraid to look person in the eye. And years ago, when I was much younger, I understood why it was. It was because of my like insecurities about my look, because that kid assumption is, if I don't look at you, you don't see me.
Ah, that
You know?
totally makes sense.
Exactly. So that's why I would avoid like eye contact. And
Mm-hmm.
and I caught myself doing that in cafe when I was ordering. And I was like, oh, you're
Mm-hmm.
doing it again. And then I just journaled on it, and I'm like, okay, tomorrow I will try to make eye contact. Just try to make eye contact. No conversation, nothing. And the moment I made eye contact, the person started talking to me. They said hello. They asked me questions. We had really good chat. And I was like, the only thing that I changed was just making an eye contact. That's
Mm-hmm.
it. And that story, it kind of got destroyed just in that moment.
Oh
I
yeah.
was like,
Blown up.
it's only day apart. Completely two different situations. The only thing that I changed is one piece of behavior. That's it.
Right.
And I
One
didn't change who I
small step.
was.
You did one small step.
Exactly. But I didn't change who I was in one day. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't become from like boring to interesting in one day. You know? But
That's funny. That's true.
but
That's
it's
true.
interesting. Exactly. But those stories that we have, it's, in some ways it's ridiculous how
Once they're
like,
exposed, you're like,
and that's one thing that I actually wanted to touch on, is about sharing those stories, because a lot of times
mm-hmm.
when they live in our heads,
Oh
they
yeah.
seem so real, so
And
real.
so big. And then the shame that comes with them. And the one thing I wanted to point out before we switch that, because I definitely want to talk about that, was, and this is for the audience, because people are triggered, not just people with childhood abuse, but people get triggered. And the one thing to pay attention is, where's that story taken you? Because in I know when you're being triggered, really triggered, it's not good. It's an automatic self-sabotage, because that in my case, that thing that I learned in my childhood to help me get through that moment, I took it into my adult life, but where it went is in my subconscious. So I'm not even until I became aware, I wasn't even aware that I was reacting this way. And that those stories, because they come from the child, and they helped at that moment, aren't going to help in my adult life. And they're going to be self-sabotaging. It's going to be some negative result for me or for someone else. So
Yeah.
that's a big one that can stop you in your tracks right there and go, okay, wait a minute. Because this story is telling me to do this thing that I know it is not going to be good for anybody. What can I do that could be positive in it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. These stories, I'm just like sitting here thinking, this is such a good conversation.
It is.
I'm just like having fun here.
I know it is really good.
Yeah, maybe about like sharing those stories, because I think that's one thing that,
Mm-hmm.
as long as that's something that I have understood about myself. Good example. I shared with you about half marathon.
Yeah.
So
It's a good one.
So I did half marathon 1st of October this year. And I went to the gym with my friend, and there's like the thought that came up that has been in my mind all this time, but I just thought of like asking her. And I was like, I don't understand one thing. She's like, what? So all this time when I would tell people that, I didn't tell like everybody, I would just tell like the closest people, like family and close friends, that I am preparing for like half marathon. Nobody said that I'm too fat to do it. Nobody didn't even question it. They were like, when? You know? And I was like, why? Because I would be convinced that somebody would throw out, because there's like so much shame that I would have. I was convinced that
Yeah.
somebody would throw out some kind of comment being like, are you sure?
Yeah.
And she was like, for me, the first thought that came in my mind was that she's probably gonna be busy. Like, because you have to prepare for a marathon or like half marathon. And it completely kind of throw me off. I was like, wait, what? Because I was expecting that she would have that thought, because I have that thought. And I think people that I say that have that thought about
Right.
it.
Right.
And I kind of project my thoughts or my beliefs on
That's what we
others.
do.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think that they think that. And it can be true with any story that we have. We think that others think what we think about ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
but actually that might literally be as she said to me, like, oh, I just thought that you're probably going to be a bit busier because you have to prepare for it. That's it. That's the whole story.
That's what I thought when you told me. I just thought, oh, you're going to be really busy. I don't know how you're going to fit that in, but okay.
And that response, and I have shared it with a few more people, and they would give me exactly same responses. They had they were like, why would you think that? I'm like, well, now I don't know anymore. Like,
yeah, I won't.
Yeah,
I don't need to.
And I think in that sharing, what happens is, because when it's in our heads and we don't share it, it's so real. We don't even question it. It's a fact. But then once you share it with somebody else, one thing is that it can be a bit like hard to share, or like you have to face some fear to share, because you kind of expose yourself, or like you become kind of vulnerable, or put yourself in a vulnerable place where they can be like, yep, that's exactly what I have been thinking.
Yeah, they could confirm all your
so you
fears,
have
right?
to be ready. Even as you share, you're sharing for the sake of sharing, not to expect whatever response. So there's no expectation of the response. But with that sharing, the moment you share it, a lot of times, even just by saying, you start to hear how ridiculous that is. But once it's inside, you don't question it. It's true. It's a fact. It's just there. And it's just like running and playing in the background the whole time.
Yep. Beating yourself up. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. The one of the biggest things to discredit shame is to say the story out loud, or even write it. And it was interesting when I did the workshop, and the first night, the women would tell one quick story, whatever story came up in their mind of their abuse. And in it, we would have them share what their thoughts were, what their feelings were, what their emotions were. And it was interesting what the thoughts were. And they were lies. They were absolute lies, but it came out of their mouths so much like it was just a part of them, like they were just like it was a positive thing. It was interesting. And we would expose it. So once they got done with their story, we would expose those lies. And when you read it back to them, it was really profound. It was interesting.
Yeah. And there's like distinction between whatever the origin of story is, what happened, and what I made it mean.
Yeah.
So that meaning that we add, that's kind of that story.
That's one thing that I have been working on, and it's interesting that we're having this podcast, because I've been actually working on this for a few months, where I'm paying attention to stuff, because we absolutely put a story to everything. It's just what we do. but we don't have to be a victim to that story, right? We can change that story. We have that ability, or just take the story away. Maybe it doesn't even need a story.
Yeah.
There, everything doesn't need a story. And that's what I've been telling myself. That's literally something I've been telling myself when I catch myself, putting a story to something that isn't going to be beneficial. I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't even need to create a story
Not
for this.
everything has to be like meaning something, you know?
Right. It doesn't. Just sometimes that happens and it just happened. It doesn't have to have this big story behind it, because that's just kind of how I managed my life was by,
I think we all
stories.
do.
Yeah. And it's really liberating because like, I don't have to spend the brain space on that now, or the energy or the emotions.
Yeah.
Because there's all of that comes with it.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like there's one thing that happens and then you create this whole story about who you are, what it means, how it's going to project in your future, why you can't achieve this, why you can't do that, why you're always going to be this way. And it's all wrapped around like one story that was in the past, which that's past, and
Yeah. And I'll tell you what's coming to my mind too is that story that I told of that couple in church, right? That got
yeah.
upset with me. I just thought, let's give an example of how he could have handled that different. So obviously there was something in the past that triggered him that gave him this story about me. And the truth is, because I thought in my head at the time, I thought, gosh, they don't know me. Because if they really knew me, they would never accuse me of that. Because that's not what I do, right? But it's their story. And that could have been a moment where he was sitting in church and thought I glared at him, where he could have stopped. He immediately went down the, oh, she's glaring at me, and whatever the story is that he created in his head, he could have went, wait, is she glaring at me? Wait, that's not like Lisa. That's not like her. Oh, no, she's looking at the person behind me. Like that's, like he could have stopped, and he knew me. He knew me, but he was so stuck in this story that it completely consumed him and took him down this road.
Or he
And he
might as well
suffered.
just like walk up to you and be like, ask, is everything okay?
Exactly. Yeah. Is everything okay? I
Yeah.
think you were glaring at me. And I would have been like, oh my gosh, no, when, it
And
would have been
just like,
confused.
because what you just with him walking up, that's example of sharing. And the moment you respond and
Correct.
you're saying like, actually, that's not true. It's just disappearing. Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just goes to, an example that in this case is making me realize how stuck in the story that we can get that we don't even look for a different outcome.
Yeah.
And that happens. It really doesn't. It really kind of happens in your subconscious because that's where it's stored and it gets triggered back there and it collides with your conscience, and when you become aware of it, that's when you start looking at it going, this is a crazy story that's going on. This does not align with what I know to be true.
Yeah.
And you can disempower it.
Yeah. I think it's really relevant also in any kind of relationships, where a lot of times we create these stories. So one person did something or said something, and now I don't know, they might, let's say jokingly say some kind of comment, and now you think that they hate you or whatever. Instead of, I actually have a good example. I had somebody message me, it was like a few years ago. It was just like messaging. And that person messaged me smiley emoji. But that emoji had like teeth. And I see that emoji as laughing. He saw it as smiling.
I see it as smiling. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Exactly. So he writes whatever the message. And I get triggered because I feel like he's laughing at me because I see the laughing emoji. It was smiley in his perception. So I write back being like, hey, like, and I think I literally asked, what do you mean by this smiley? Because it seems like you're laughing at me. And he's like, no, like it's me smiling. I'm like, okay, got it. So that's how I instantly stopped whatever could have been the story.
Boy, that could have gone a real
exactly
bad road.
But I think for me to be able, like, you have to be able to put yourself in vulnerable place, because by saying that, I can actually get in a place where I get whatever comment can come back. Oh, why are you so dramatic? Like, or whatever it could be the comment, that could trigger me. But the moment I explain my perception, I give the other person that what's the word? Like I allow them to approve or disapprove that, oh, I understood it right or wrong. And it's like that at any kind of communication. So I see this. Is it true or not? And they're like, no, it's actually this. And I'm like, oh, story gone. It's instant.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, when I'm thinking back on why I never, not confront people, but have a conversation with people when I thought that there was confusion is, first of all, again, that belief system that I had that nobody liked me and that everything was my fault. And I did not want to hear, I was not going to get confirmation of that. I was not going to have someone point the finger at me by me, trying to get clarity and get the clarity of, oh yeah, you really are. Nobody likes you. And everything's your fault. It was just that shame so consumed me that I focused on trying to do the right things, even though I wasn't always doing them clearly.
You know what shame does? It keeps stories alive.
It totally does. It is the fuel. It is the gasoline, the fuel for shame.
Yeah, because
for the story. Yeah.
And the way and that's what we discussed when we were talking about self-love and shame. The way we stop shame is by sharing. And I don't know how it works, but the moment you share, even without knowing what will be response, it somehow goes away.
And I know in my life, when I have shared like that, when I, especially in the beginning, when it doesn't have the effect on me like it used to, but when I was just so vulnerable and so I felt like pretty frail, I couldn't handle that. And when I started that, and when there would be confirmation of the truth, which was good, it would just be like, like it would build your confidence. And with time, now it's not that I don't care what people think. That's not true at all. It's information that I can take in, but I don't have a story to it like I used to. It's certainly not the same story.
Yeah, or you don't make it mean something bad. It's
Right.
just information.
It's just information, and it doesn't, because that also linked to if I had, of course, did something wrong, or it just fueled that whole shame in me and just made me go inward even more.
So what can we do about our stories? So let's say if somebody listening is identifying stories that they might have that they might not want to have, what are some of the things that they could do about it?
The biggest thing is really proving to yourself that it's a story and that it's not the reality, really is the key, right? Because once you realize, oh, it's just a story, it doesn't have a grip on you anymore. So, spend some time with that story. Look at the story and then look at the evidence. More importantly, don't just look at the story. You already know the story. Look at it real quick and then go look for evidence that's the opposite. Really be objective and look for the opposite, and you'll find it. You will absolutely find it because you are now looking for it. And so you are going to find it. And that is going to blow up that story. And that story all of a sudden has no power over you anymore.
Yeah. And even like with stories, another thing that you can do is to think about, let's say something happened and story got created. You can ask yourself, what do I make it mean about me?
Yeah.
And that's where you will find a lot of roots for some of the beliefs that you might have about yourself that you might not want to have. And you might even look further down the line how you started to maybe reinforce those beliefs. It doesn't mean that they're true. You just kept reinforcing them. So what you did is you gave yourself more and more proof. So now if you want to change it, exactly, you have to start to give yourself different evidence for what is it that you want. And in the beginning, it's really uncomfortable. It kind of feels fake. It's like, but the more you do that, the more you start to literally believe that, because you start to focus on what you see outside of you, and to some extent, even inside of you, that is making it true. That now this new story or that new belief is kind of being true.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to the point, and that's something actually I had just this week. I had like mini breakdown where I was like, oh my gosh, this is too much. And I was exhausted in the evening. It was like 10:30 p.m. And I still had to do my second workout as well on top of being like super tired and like exhausted mentally and physically. And I was like, I don't want to. And there was like, I think there was like 10 minutes until the end of the workout. And I felt like my victim mode wanted to creep up. Where like before I would just like go into victim mode. I would just not do the workout to start with. And if I would
Mm-hmm.
do it the whole workout, I would be like, why am I doing this? This is I wouldn't really like even try on the workout. I wouldn't even probably do it. I would just like be a mess. But there was, and this is the second time that this has happened this year. Um, I wanted to start crying, but that crying wasn't coming from a place of releasing emotions, but it was coming from a place of feeling like a victim. And when it
Mm.
started to come up, there was literally something inside of me that was like, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. You're not the victim
Ooh.
here. And
Ooh.
it wasn't like forced. I'm not a victim. I'm not it wasn't that. It
Yeah.
was just, yeah, like we're not doing that. You're not the victim here.
Ooh,
Like,
I love
this might
that.
suck. You might not like the way you feel right now, but you're not the victim here.
That's really good.
Yeah. And that's an example of me years ago. I would be in the like full on victim mode,
Mm-hmm.
being like, oh my gosh, this is so hard, and I still have such a long way to go in like all areas that I want to improve. Blah, blah, blah. And now I was like, yeah, you're not the victim here. Just like you might this me feeling, it might suck, but you're not the
Mm-hmm.
victim. You as long as you keep taking action, like just wait for it. Um and
Yeah,
and
that's
that's an
good.
example where now feeling like a victim, it doesn't seem familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before, it was literally not being a victim wasn't familiar.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh
that's how
yeah.
you can change that story over time, where a story that you would be attached to or that would feel like that's my reality right now, it seems weird for me even to like when it would come up, I'm like, and it wasn't even me, there was just like something in me that was like, no, 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 we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
No, you're
And
not the victim.
that's the self-awareness that you've built over time where you can recognize when that stuff is trying to rear its ugly head because it's going to. It's going to. I
And I
mean, this
don't think
stuff
it's
and that's
just
how we manage
awareness.
it.
I don't think it's just awareness because even when so there was like a point where I was a victim and I didn't see that. Then there was a point where I was a victim. I could see that, but I was still a victim. It was still
Mm-hmm.
happening. I would just like
Mm-hmm.
watch it happening.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, here we go again. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the place that I think is really tough to be because you feel like there's no way out. You
Right.
actually see it and it's
It's a
happening.
cycle. Yeah.
Exactly. And you feel hopeless about changing it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But this time it it was more of awareness that the victim is kind of unfamiliar. It's just
Mm-hmm.
it wanted to come up, and I'm like, that doesn't seem like familiar. That seems
Yeah.
really like ugh.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really interesting because that I'm and it's something even it's like example of how that resilience and the strength in ourselves it builds over time. You might not see day to
Mm-hmm.
day, but then there comes a day where literally I'll be like so overwhelmed. Like I think at the beginning of the year I had another moment like that where I was really overwhelmed, where I was like on a walk and I'm like, I'm done with this. um and and I literally wanted to go into victim mode, and the voice in my mind was like, you're not there yet, just keep going. You might break down, but you're not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to experience that because I would never imagine that happening. And a friend of mine said, wait until the next level where that voice of that doubt or fear is just not there. You just go and
Yeah.
do.
It's blocked. And and it's true. When you haven't been living that life anymore, when you have worked through that, because I totally had the victim mindset 100% for years. And in that I was in survival mode. So It was really tough. And it was a lot of chaos, and it was a lot of stuff going through my head all the time, and it was a lot of shame. And when you start healing from that, and that's not part of your everyday life, and then you have a moment where you're experiencing it, it is so obvious and so uncomfortable. It's one of those times I say I want to crawl out of my own skin and get away from myself, because it's just, I don't want to feel like that anymore. I realize I lived that way for so long, and it's really uncomfortable. And that awareness and of not wanting to be there, and that is what motivates me to figure out a way to get out of that moment real quick.
Yeah. And this makes me think about that saying that like you choose your hard. So it's hard to be a
Oh yeah.
victim, but it's also hard to be strong. And it's kind of choosing
Yeah.
your heart, especially when you go through like healing or growth journey. Like every day you have to choose the hard because it's not
Yeah.
easy. It's hard.
Right.
And you
Mm-hmm.
don't even see the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how far it is. All you can do
Mm-hmm.
is just choose hard today. And
And there's days that you choose hard today and you feel like you're not seeing anything,
yeah,
but over time, I'm telling you, it adds up real quick. And all of a sudden, one day you go,
how did I
wow,
get
oh,
here?
yeah, I don't feel the way I used to. And you start becoming aware. I promise you, just keep taking those baby steps. And you're going to have days where you feel like you've failed, but you haven't, because you still take that step. You're going to make mistakes. Give yourself a lot of grace,
Yeah.
a
And
lot.
even if there is a days when you don't take steps, which I have had plenty,
Yeah,
still somehow you get to the next level. As long as
you do.
you don't make that one bad day mean anything. It
Don't
was
put a
just a one
story.
bad day.
Don't put a
Exactly.
story with that day. Maybe it was a day that you just needed to go and rest and do nothing, and that's okay. That's still a step moving forward, because
Yeah.
for some
Or you
reason,
were just
your body
lazy.
needs a rest.
That's it. You were just lazy.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. You're being lazy.
Yeah.
Yep. It's what you need to do that day. And there's no judgment, and
Yeah.
there's no story that should go with that. So the next day, you might really be energized, especially if you spend time in a positive way and not beat yourself up. The next day, you're going to have a lot of energy and you're going to get a lot done.
Yeah, like even for me, that next day after that mini breakdown, actually, because I kept doing the workout, and after workout, I also did the cold shower. I finished like reading my pages. I did a bit more work. Like I pretty much like was up until like 1 a.m. By the end of that day, even though I was like even more exhausted, I was like, it was a good day. And
Yeah.
and that's where the the hard days are the ones that count the most. Good days, we all gonna have good days. We all can show up on good days. We can make those hard decisions on good days.
Mm-hmm.
But what matters the most is what we do on those hard days where you don't want to do anything, you feel like you're done, but not coming from a place where you force it or you try to like just like I have to do it. Like it's kind of
At any
toxic approach.
cost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where now you make it mean something again that you have to do it, and if I don't do it, it means this. But it's just that less tension, but you still make that decision when it's hard to make it.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the days that actually count the most, and that's where you probably take the biggest leaps, because I can remember so many days, and those are the days when I know that I have had, let's say, day to day, on good days, it might be like 1% increase or like improvement. On those days, it's easily like 10%, because
Mm-hmm. You
that
feel it.
day, exactly, it's literally like 10 days in one, because that
It's like
one
your life
decision,
goes in a different direction.
yeah,
It
that
really
one
like takes
decision,
you.
literally you can over time internally feel how making decision that you usually wouldn't, it literally changes you, because that's how you
Mm-hmm.
change. You start to do things that you usually don't.
Mm-hmm.
If you do things that you usually do, you stay the same. If
You
you
stay the
start,
same.
it's as simple as that.
It
Like,
really is.
yeah, if you want to change your life, make different, better, not different, better decisions
Mm-hmm.
for
Healthier
yourself.
decisions for
Yeah.
yourself, and don't put a story to everything, and give yourself a lot of grace. And I say that over and over, because we are hardest on ourselves. And remember, think about this. When you hear that stuff going on in your head where you're beating yourself up, would you treat your loved ones like that? Would you say that to your best
Yeah.
friend? Would you say that to your child? Would you say that to your brother, sister, parent? No. And so you cannot say that to yourself. It is not okay. You cannot give yourself permission to do that to yourself anymore. You're going to make mistakes, and it's okay to have remorse. But then what did you learn from it? What did you learn from it and move forward? Because
Yeah.
everybody's in the same boat.
We all are in our heads.
Too much
And I just
sometimes.
yeah, and not in a good way. But
I mean, it was
yeah.
really liberating for me when I came to the conclusion that I'm an overthinker.
How did you come to that conclusion?
I actually kind of studied on it a little bit, and I just realized so much of what I did. Like, I really put stories to my stuff, right? And I had to recognize that. And I just, I kept seeing the word overthinking, overthinking, and I just started studying it, and I realized, oh my gosh, I do that all the time. I can spend weeks on a story. It can even come back a couple years later and live in my head for a few more weeks. I mean, it was really a lot of suffering that I did that I didn't need to. And so once I realized that I was overthinking,
Yeah.
then I had to put in place the tools to stop it. And those tools are still, I have to, it is something that I will always have to maintain, because if I'm not paying attention to it, it will absolutely get away from me.
I wonder if stories are not our protection mechanism of actually taking action.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I really do. Because those stories a lot of times started in a situation where you needed it to get you out of that situation safely, especially in the childhood abuse and trauma arena. Um, and so your brain went, ooh, that worked. Cool. Note to
Yeah.
self. Next time something even appears to be like that, that solution comes up
Yeah.
and we automatically go forward with it. So yeah.
And then fast forward, we now are so attached to that story that it becomes the reason or an excuse not to take action, to actually change
It
anything.
does. It does. It went at the moment, it was your safety mechanism, and then it turns toxic because it's something that you needed in the moment. It's not something that you need for a lifetime. And so exactly, it becomes toxic. And like I said, your brain notes like, oh, that worked, and it kind of stores it in your subconscious. So fast forward 10 years, and a situation comes up that seems in your mind very similar to that situation, your mind is automatically going to bring that forward. And if you're not aware, you're going to go right down that road without even realizing it. And then, like you say, you get to that place where you're realizing, okay, I'm doing this cycle thing. I'm aware of it, but I don't know how to get out of it.
Yeah, and
And really
sometimes even like people use that, and I was in that place for years. I was
that's the
like,
victim
oh,
mode.
I'm like this because of, and I was like kind of know it all as well on top of it.
Right.
I'm like this because of this. I had like the whole thing mapped out. But
The whole story.
when it came to doing anything about it, I couldn't because I'm like this because of this.
Right. Right. Right.
So
And so it's
now I talk
powerless.
myself out of actually doing the thing that I need to do to change whatever it is that I have. I'm just like, okay, so this is a story. So if I have to do anything about it, like here's the story as my reason why I can't really do it or change it. That's the story. And and it's so easy to get stuck there because when it comes to change, when it comes to addressing whatever it is that we have created in those stories, that's hard.
That's hard. That's hard. And it really is as simple as when you see that it's a story, it really is as simple as figuring out a different way to respond
Yeah.
than what your story's been telling you. It really is that simple. And it's just a little step. And that the first time you are able to do that and you're able to recognize that, your confidence is going to shoot up. And you're going to feel empowered because all of a sudden these stories aren't me and controlling me and, you know, being part of my life, and I have to just suffer with them. You now are empowered to go, wait a minute, no, that story does not have a hold on me. And you know what, I'm not even going to listen to it. I'm going to do this.
Yeah, even
And
if you take that small action and that action might fail, but at least you have showed yourself what you said,
correct.
that story doesn't control you. You can still do
Correct.
something different than you did before. And that in itself, that's you pretty much taking back your power.
It totally is. And it's showing your mind evidence that is different. And that is what you need to focus on, is the different evidence, you know, the evidence that's real, not the different evidence, but the evidence that's real.
Yeah.
But it is very empowering. And, you know, I can just remember when I was in my stories, and man, I had a story for everything.
Yep.
And they were mostly excuses. But it was just so, it was just a really frightening place to be. Because I just felt like I was just part of this story and I didn't have any say in it. And that's not true. And so the steps are, you know, slow down, start paying attention to as much as you can the thoughts going through your head. And this takes a lot of work. It when you're first starting out. Paying attention to when something happens, what story's coming up in your head. Then question that story. Is it true? Is there evidence showing me that it's true? Or is there evidence showing me that it's not true? And then what is that story causing you to, how you're going to react? How's that story causing you to react? Is it a healthy, positive, or is it usually self-sabotage, or you're going to hurt the other person?
Yeah.
And then pick a different reaction that's going to be beneficial to everyone. And if you take the time and you pause and you think this stuff through, you'll find that answer. It's just when we're in that moment, everything's going so fast, and our minds just want to go to the normal thing that we always do, that we really do have to take a pause, and we really do have to take some breaths and slow that down. And you do have that ability. And again, it's a process. It's challenging at first, but with practice, it absolutely gets easier.
Yeah. And the key is just don't stop. Like, don't stop
Just
trying.
Don't stop trying. Yeah.
Even with all the different things that you can try out and all the different tools that are out there, I think I still learn literally on a daily basis something new about myself, where I'm like, dang it.
Oh yeah, me
still
doing these podcasts makes you, you know, put you on the firing line for sure.
Yeah. But at the same time, that's what it's about. It's
right.
It's not like we would want to have a finish line for all of this, where we arrive and everything is perfect. But, well, one, what's the fun in that? Especially when you're a bit more into growth phase. Maybe in the healing phase, there's nothing fun at all.
Yeah. At least the beginning, it's a challenge.
Yeah. And it's also really rewarding to look back on all of those, even if you would try to count all of those decisions that you made when you had this story that you would usually react this way, and you're like, I'm gonna react this way. It's similar to what Huberman, what's his word, Andrew Huberman, he was talking about cold exposure, how it's not as much about how long you stay as much about how many walls you overcome. Walls being like, oh, I feel like coming out, overcome that wall, stay 1 second longer. Or like, I don't feel like going in, overcome that wall and go in. And it's the same with even like, you can, and I literally did it with some walls, even like in anything, in gym, and doing some calls that I'm like, oh, I want to cancel this call, but I don't. That's a wall that I overcame. So you start to count those walls, and especially if you start to like even like write them down, you look back and you have pages and pages and pages. That's how you can visually see the amount of the work or those decisions that you have made that are helping you to change that direction slowly. And at some point you will start to feel how even like things like saying no or doing something that you or not reacting the way that you usually would,
Mm-hmm.
it's becoming more maybe unfamiliar to do your old normal things.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're starting to slowly shift into the new one, but that change from one to the other, that's where it's kind of messy.
It gets, yeah, it's like spring cleaning. It gets real messy before it gets better.
Yeah.
And
And
the
you
thing,
need to go through that.
it is very important, just like a butterfly. A caterpillar turns to a butterfly, you know. We have them in our backyard. It's been really cool this last summer. We've had a lot of them. And I did a little study on them because I thought it was really interesting that this caterpillar, you know, can turn into this amazing butterfly. And I knew that they like kind of disintegrate when they're in their chrysalis or whatever you call it, in their little cocoon.
Yeah.
But the whole, they completely, there is nothing. They are a mess and they come out beautiful. And the thing that I wanted to bring up too, when you are looking at, like you said, if you write down and you're looking at it or you're recognizing that, hey, I'm starting to do things different, give yourself a good pat on the back, seriously, because we don't do that. And nobody else is going to come along regularly and do that.
Good
You need
job. I
to,
caught this decision that you did.
exactly. And I've done that. I literally have done that. Like I've reacted to something like, good job. Like I literally do that. And it might feel weird, you know, nobody sees it, but it does a lot for you. And you need to give yourself credit because we are so hard on ourselves, especially those coming out of, you know, any kind of trauma like that. It's so easy to be really hard on ourselves and, you know, recognize that voice that's talking to you.
Yeah,
Is it an
when I was
abuser?
doing those walls, I was actually starting to kind of play it as a game. I was like, oh, nice, 7 today, you know?
Yeah.
And then you
Challenging
start,
yourself.
yeah, so you start to shift focus also with doing that. You shift focus away from all the things you do wrong to those small wins that you have in that day. And they literally could be like really, I remember one that was, it felt so big, but it's so small. So I was about to order like coffee, and there was an option that you can add syrup. And I was literally that I really wanted it. And I was like, this is a wall, but I so want it. I was standing there 5 minutes being like, but I really want it, but it's a wall. And if you overcome it, now you're going to be one step closer to where you want to be. But I want a syrup. And I would just
That's so how it happens. Oh my
I would
gosh.
literally be standing there like 5 minutes and being like, and there's like 4 types of syrups that I can choose from. And there was like this strawberry one. I remember it was strawberry that I hadn't tried yet. And I was like, I so want it. I was thinking about it the whole time in the gym. I was
Oh my
like, I
gosh.
can't wait until I'm done. And then I'm gonna have that strawberry like added to my coffee. And then as I was walking towards that place, I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't have it. It was actually more than 5 minutes, but it was like the whole thing. I was like, well, actually, if I don't get it, then I'm making this good decision and I overcome a wall, but I want it. And that's literally, I would have many like, and this is ridiculous, seemingly ridiculous thing, right?
That's a really good point. Wow.
Exactly. But, and it doesn't matter actually how ridiculous that is. But because what matters is you overcoming the wall.
Absolutely.
And sometimes the wall can maybe externally be huge, but this one might externally be like really tiny. But for me, that day, that moment, I was like, I so want it. And I still made a decision not to get it. And once I did that, I was like, well, actually, I'm fine. Like, it's
not so bad after all. Yeah. It's the story that you put behind it too, right? Because and what were you focusing on?
Exactly.
And that is such a great example. And it can be as simple as that, but profound as that as well.
Exactly. So like it's still a win. And
that's
something that I tell people a lot is don't focus on how big is the win. As long as it's a win and you overcome something in you to do something, or as simple as like, I don't know, picking up a paper that's on the ground. That's a win, you know? And you just keep collecting those wins, and there comes a time that you stop focusing on all the negatives and you just wake up and you're like, why is everything so good? Like, why am I so like mature or like developed? It's because of those like small tiny decisions, as simple as not taking syrup when you really want it.
You know, and you know, for me, it's like when I used to always focus on the negative and look for the negative, it feels really crappy. I mean, frankly, it feels pretty shitty.
Yep.
But
Not
when you
only for
aren't
you.
doing, oh yeah, right, right. So it puts me in this stupor, which then affects everybody around me.
Mhm.
And so when you aren't in that place anymore, and then you do get a taste of it, you real quickly want to shut that thing down. You don't
Oh,
want to
yeah.
feel like that.
You
And you
don't
will find
tolerate it.
it becomes almost automatic where you're like, okay, I don't like the way I'm feeling right now. What's going on? Okay, that's that. Okay, what can I do to change it? Okay, I can do that. And maybe not that quick, but it really can be that in your life. And you're not suffering for hours, days, months with
Yep.
those thoughts and those stories. Um, yeah, it's really liberating, and I lived for 50 plus years with those stories going on in my head all the time before I realized, first of all, I was an overthinker, and then I put a story to everything. Like literally,
How was it to change? Can you remember a story that, well, one probably was That Nobody Likes You, that was really long story. So it wasn't just story that was there like 6 months. It was there for decades. How was it changing that story that has been there for decades? Because then by then that story is like, you literally have created like pretty good book about it.
well, I guess another one would be that I was a mistake and that I need to stay under the radar.
Mm.
That's a big one. And I've been literally hearing in my head at least 10 years, come out from under the radar. And I would not do, no, 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 no.
What
Well,
was the
I'm out
reason for not doing it?
for not coming out from under the
Yeah,
radar.
like when you would hear that voice come out, and you'd be like, nope. Like, what would be the reason for no?
Because why would I come out from under the radar? There's no purpose. There's no reason. I was a mistake. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be doing this. I'm just existing right now. I mean, it really got that bad.
Yeah.
It really was that bad. And that, I don't have really a purpose. And now I went from staying under the radar. I mean, it even got to the point that when I decided to do the podcast, I even thought, oh, I got to have a partner in it. I got to have someone doing it with me. I can't do it by myself. Oh no, I got to, and I kept hearing, nope, 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 nope. You are not going to have anybody doing it on the podcast with you. No, you are doing this. You are coming out from under the radar. And I did. I went from nobody knowing me to putting myself out there to where anybody can see me now.
Where
I
did that
mean,
second voice come from? Because that's a completely different voice.
I think because I have found my purpose for sure. And my purpose is to shorten people's pain. And my purpose is to, I would love to see people not suffer the amount of years that I suffered. That if I can put stuff out there to shorten people's pain, and a lot of healing, a lot of knowing that I do have a purpose, that I wasn't a mistake. Like there's been a lot of aha moments over the last 10 years of realizing who I am. And I don't have that belief system anymore that I was a mistake and, I need to stay under the radar, keep my mouth shut, don't ruffle feathers,
Yeah.
don't, go along, always put somebody, because like I always put people in my life, if I was going to do something like this, I would definitely hand over the reins to them and let them run the show. And I would pipe in here and there and have my, that's definitely the place I would take. And I know that's why I heard no, 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 because that's exactly what I would have done. I would have put someone in there that I would have allowed them, and it's not them, it's me. I would allow them to take over
Because of
because
your
I got to stay
story.
under the radar. Right. I have to stay under that radar.
The
Not interesting.
stories.
I know. That's a big story. And that one crippled me. I mean, I don't want to go back and say, oh, I should have done this. We don't, this is the timing. I was ready for it. And this is the time, but my number one mission is to be able to put stuff out there that is going to shorten other people's pain so they don't go years like I did
Yeah.
or other people.
And I would invite anybody who becomes aware of their stories to be open to sometimes even laughing about them or being
Oh,
like, how
totally.
ridiculous is this? Like,
Definitely,
you know?
definitely laugh at them, make fun of them because they are ridiculous.
Yeah. And not fun in where you're like beating yourself up, but
Yeah.
but just seeing how ridiculous we can be in
All of
whatever,
us.
all of us.
We
You
all
just
do
heard
this.
all of our ridiculous stories that we're having, and that's like maybe like 1% of them.
Right, right. Oh, yeah.
There's
Very
like
tip of the
so many that
iceberg.
we have, and imagine if we would share them and we would be like, oh, like I was like, how could I not see this? And we just beat ourselves up for like not
And focus
seeing
on
it.
that.
Exactly. Instead of being like, yeah, it's actually pretty ridiculous. Like, you know,
Yeah.
but I'm sure many people can relate to that because we all
Yeah.
have these ridiculous stories that I think it's important to have some level of like sense of humor to be able to challenge them or
Yeah.
change them. Because if we don't, then we take them so seriously
And
that
they're still a
again,
part of us.
yeah, that they still mean something. But
Yeah.
all it is just like just a story that we came up with and we just went with it.
And sometimes like I'll be, our minds can throw stuff at us when we're not expecting it. And sometimes it'll throw a story at me. And, I immediately want to go down that road in the victim mode, but I quickly see what it's doing and I can shut it down real quick.
Yeah.
And sometimes though, and it depends, like if I'm tired or if I'm not feeling good, boy, you can really be vulnerable to mind games and stories and go down the road. So you really got to be careful and, pay attention where are you tired? Are you not feeling good? Did you just really kind of have a bad day? I mean, that's going to happen. And so that will also open up the door for your head to really build those stories up or play them over and over and over and over again. And you got to realize, hey, I'm tired today. I'm really going to try not to. And one of the things that I learned, there's a couple of things that I learned that's kind of interesting. When this one's really good. When you catch your mind going, you don't feel like you can stop it. Just say to yourself, I wonder what I'm going to think next. And all of a sudden, you're not thinking anything. And sometimes I have to say it over and over and over because the thoughts will try to come back. I'm telling you, it works. And the one at night, sometimes if my mind gets going, and it's not so much, I can fall asleep. I don't have a problem falling asleep. But if I wake up and my mind wants to go, just start counting. And kind of slowly, like 1, 2, 3, and focus. And I'm telling you, I think the highest number I've gotten to is 30. It works. So those are things, because sometimes we just kind of have to trick our mind. Sometimes we just have to do a trick to just shut it down because it's just, it gets exhausting. It gets really,
it's a
and when
meaning
you're already
making
tired,
machine. It has to
it
work all the
is.
time.
It wants to solve everything. It wants to, it's looking for a problem that it can solve. And so, the thing that's empowering is we can manage it. It doesn't have to manage us, and there's little tricks. And those are two that really, I'm telling you, have helped me a lot.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add? I feel like we covered so much.
I know. I think we did. We covered a lot. No, I don't think so. I think I'm spent.
Yeah. Just look at your stories as you would read a book. It's
There
just
you
a
go.
story.
Yeah. It's just a story. Don't put
Yeah.
meaning into it. It's just a story. Don't put no, I don't say don't put because that's easier said than done. Try not to put, the emotions and the feelings and the energy into that story. It's just a story, just like you're reading a book.
Yeah. And maybe then you can read that story about the meaning that you put in that story. And here's a story about the meaning that I put in that story.
Right. And writing stuff down, just like you were saying earlier, saying stories, speaking them out, writing them is another way too. And you can write these crazy stories out and you can turn around and tear it up and burn it or whatever so nobody sees it. I know what helped me when I was sharing that story a few months ago when I got triggered was actually saying the crazy stuff to my husband. And he's my safe place. and bless his heart, he just sat there and he was driving and he just smiled and he just let me, say the crazy, I said, because I looked at him, I said, this is crazy. This is crazy stuff in my head. I'm just going to say it. Here it is. But I said
Yeah.
it. And then I said, okay, but we're not going to do that. We're going to instead do this thing that is beneficial to me, not detrimental to me.
Yeah, that's another way to go. Find your safe person and just share that, and then just say what you're actually going to do.
Yeah, just do the disclosure, which is, look, I'm just going to download right now. This is just going to sound crazy. Just go with me and just say it. And I'm telling you, it gets completely disempowered.
Yeah, just get it out of your
Mhm.
mind.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good to me.
I know. And then it won't roll around in your head anymore.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
This
We're
is
good
great.
to go.
Yeah,
Going into
we're
the
good.
next year.
Yeah, next year. We'll have to figure out our next subject. This was really good.
Yeah. And by the way, any listeners, if you have any topics or things that you want us to
Questions.
discuss, where can they reach and send them in?
So you can go to my website and you can send me an email, which my website is healingandgrowinghandinhandpodcast.com. And then my email is lisa@healingandgrowinghandinhandpodcast.com. So send me questions, topics, ideas. Yeah, we have a ton of them, but sometimes there may be one out there that we don't even know about. And I'm always trying to find interesting topics too.
And relevant.
Relevant, interesting topics, that you don't necessarily see out there. There's things that I'm researching that I want to bring forward that I'm shocked, like the one episode I did on infertility. I had no idea that trauma could create infertility, but it totally makes sense, right? So it's off topics like that you think, how could infertility affect, but it makes sense. So topics like that where I can bring information that will help people that may not get it anywhere else.
Yeah. That's the goal. So yeah. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yes, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. I love it. Happy Hanukkah, all the holidays.
See you next year.
Yes.